Chapter 9 Winter 879. Rain beat down as the little coracles rode out of Ratlin. Iona was a day away in the calm, but in this, it could be longer. Sweat and rain fell into the faces of the men. Osrith too had an oar and was pulling with all her might as the salty blue-green northern sea drenched her for her efforts. Domhnall's leather-covered coracle was ahead. They had taken on pilots from Ratlin and were heading northeast, to St. Cuthbert's Isle, Iona. Once or twice, the swell of the currents pitched them forward. Constantine had nearly been thrown out, and had only been saved because his boot had landed between Osrith's own. After that, Taggart had lashed her to the mast, screaming over the howling gale that she was too light, and she may fall overboard. There would be no coming back from the churning, boiling sea. Osrith closed her eyes for the remainder of the journey, as the middle-aged monk who was guiding them picked up the strain. It had been madness to even consider such a crossing, the abbot at Ratlin had told Domhnall. But, considered he had, and pursued, St. Colmcille's Isle being their resting place, when they would finally reach it. "Colmcille will be with us all," he told them as they stood on a storm-soaked beach, the coracles knocking together as if they, too, were afraid. Osrith had closed her eyes. As Colmcille was to the Gaels, Cuthbert was to the Northumbrians. Tossed and soaked in the little vessel, Osrith prayed to their blessed saint. The Danes and Norse are the best sailors in the world, Taggart had boasted that night, except for the Irish. "What has Domhnall told you?" Constantine had asked, having woken her up in Ratlin's priory, the night before, where the warriors were sleeping. She had blinked a few times, in the darkness, having slept surprisingly well, and a feeling of pity entered her chest that she was still not asleep. "Are you frightened?" Constantine asked her. Osrith propped herself up on the blankets, which smelled of horse, considering those two questions. Constantine moved across, taking care not to wake Fergus or Taggart, and sat close enough to Osrith that she could feel his chest moving in and out. Osrith did not know how much he knew of her pregnancy, or loss, but she had heard Domhnall, on the morning before they left the Foyles coast, to the loud protests of denial from Constantine, tell him that he was to restrain himself. And now, side by side, he did not even touch her hand. "Frightened of what, Constantine?" Osrith asked. "About the plan? When we get to Dund. After Domhnall's coronation?" Dund. Osrith knew of the place, though what it was, she did not know. It was Tara to the Gaels of Dulreadur, their capital, where coronations were held. "I don't know of any plan," Osrith told him, wondering about the place. "So how can I be afraid of what I don't know?" She had stared into the darkness at Constantine, wondering at his vague question. Was he about to tell her something? Dund was supposed to be mountainous, so she had an idea of a settlement with mountains like those in the Ulaid territory, gentle sloping mounds which made up the Mourne range. Ideal for Eochaid's snipers? She would fight. And Osrith suddenly felt happy, she knew, after everything, after her abortion, after Nine Fingers' attack, that she truly could. It had settled on her mind as lightly as a butterfly might on one's hand. She was a warrior first, and no other life would fit for her. Frightened of what? She had asked again of the prince. But Constantine hadn't answered. The following morning, as she had pulled at the coracle's ashwood oar, she felt joy again that her strength was returning, as if confirming the realization of the night before. But she needed to steel herself, like Bué, she needed to be Bué, and look after herself. If her own brute force was not enough, wit and guile must be employed. Osrith wanted to fight, and enjoy the wealth and comforts warriors enjoyed, wealth being the most vital, she knew, for she injured more often than if she had been a man. She could just choose to give up, be a servant, hide away, she supposed. Images of that day, on Loch Foyle's shore, still invaded her mind, but she had found that training, battle, even polishing the sword she had won, twice, drove the memories away. Osrith was a warrior, she knew that in her heart, and to fight was all she wanted for the rest of her life. And, should she ever go back to Irian, means to support herself in pocket, she would seek out Nine Fingers and chop his cock off. In the darkness of the night before, Osrith suspected Constantine knew how she felt about fighting, for he wanted to know, "Will you continue to fight for Domnall?" while ignoring her question. "He is my lord, I am his warrior." Constantine said nothing more. It was strange, Osrith thought. When she was in his company, thoughts of finding a peace with herself rapidly came to nothing. Constantine had a way of challenging her decisions before she had even decided what they were. "You?" she added, as a storm in the making slammed noisy, energetic gusts around the stables, determined to make the most of being woken up. "Yes," Constantine replied. "We are to meet our allies, the Grigors, and we are going, with the Tara Stone to Dund, then Scone, with the Tara Stone. Then," he added, laconically, "we are going to fight Eochaid and kill Giric. Domnall says once Giric dies, Eochaid will renounce his claim to Pitland, to Scotland, and his son, Dyfnwal, will submit to him. And even if Eochaid doesn't, Domnall will still be crowned." It sounded like a sensible plan to Osrith: muster as many allies as possible, win the heart of the people with a coronation, crowning MC Alpin's natural successor. Fight when the enemy suspects an attack least. Yet, from what Osrith had gleaned from their small encounter with Giric at Glashku, at Eochaid's palace, was that the man had weasel cunning. He was bound to have as many schemes half-built ready to be rolled out against Domnall at a moment's notice, to keep himself, through Eochaid's grandfather's claim, Saenid Mac Alpin again, on the throne of Pitland. What of Irian? Osrith asked of Constantine. Did Domnall say anything of Muir? And the princes and princesses? In the darkness, she glanced over to the sleeping form of Domnall, who was now in exile. What would become of his family? Of Queen Muir if Don Shada decided to seize the throne and fight his father? Of little Neil Grubbeeknees? "Once we have won, then Mary and Dira will be sent for," Constantine replied. But, that was not what Osrith had meant. Clearly, impending matrimony weighed on Constantine's mind. "Then," he added, "Domnall thinks Don Shada will fight his father, in the end, for the southern lands, at least, if not the northern." Osrith sighed. Civil war was as terrible as war between mortal foes, if not more so. And they had the Norse needling them, for she was sure the policy of starvation would not keep them reined in for long. And, they were heading to another. Eochaid was their cousin through another sister of Muir and Constantine's father, and their grandfather, Saenid Mac Alpin. His claim to Dulriada and Pitland could be argued as strong as that of either Domnall or Constantine. Domnall had spoken of a Dane who had taken some of Cumbraland's land, south of Caeligwylid, Hearthknut, and who had been slaughtered by Eochaid, his son captured and enslaved, his daughter holed away at a monastery. Maybe incursions into Strathclyde were enough to distract Eochaid and give Domnall the edge. For, though they were only 6, if Eochaid's spies were worth their pay, the king of Strathclyde would know of their return. And even if not, he would surely have heard of the arrival of 100 tons of red sandstone arriving at Iona in the summer. In the darkness, as rain beat on the slatted wooden roof above them, dripping down the walls and seeping into the straw, she had told Constantine to get his rest for the next day, and he had moved away from her, although Osrith sensed his reluctance. They slept easily by one another, too easily, in the past. But the truth was, apart from Domnall, whom she trusted above all men, she was relieved. Osrith couldn't bear the idea of anyone touching her. How she longed for battle, against whom? She didn't care. To kill men in battle because they were her lord's enemy, that thought cheered her. For, not do so meant, ultimately, reliance in the charity of men, who may see her back to Elfrek should someone figure the truth of her. She would not have her life governed by any man. Osrith's strength was returning,